The smell of blood and ash pierced through 10 years of time. Stinging the nose that night, the northern sky was red. It wasn't snow that covered the world, but black ash pouring from the shattered, burning beams of Changryingmen. The gate tower of the great sect that once ruled the northern snowfields had become nothing more than a massive torch, painting the night sky a distorted orange. Save me. The death throes were buried beneath the sound of collapsing roof tiles, and the melted snow mixed with cold blood, rising in eerie steam. A boy around 10 years old, Anhyun, held his breath before the cold corpses of the parents who had given him life. The child bit his lip hard enough to draw blood instead of letting out the sobs that threatened to burst forth. The taste of blood spread through his mouth, but an even more terrible fear paralyzed his entire body. Crunch, crunch. The sound of footsteps on snow, but these were no ordinary footsteps. Black shadows, imbued with killing intent, were searching through the ashes for the child. From the tips of their swords, the blood of his senior brothers who had been alive just moments ago dripped, creating dark red holes in the snow. Find him. Not a single seed of Changryong must remain. A command colder than ice fell. That voice was twisted with such terrible hatred and greed that one could not believe it belonged to someone who spoke of righteousness. The child instinctively turned his body. The hot flames scorched his clothes, but there was no time to feel pain. The child crawled and rolled like a beast between the collapsing beams. His mother's voice calling for him echoed in his ears, but he could not look back. Only the instinct to survive whipped his small body forward. How long had he run? The child barely landed in the snowfield outside the gate, having crossed over the remains of the massive gate tower, and then he collapsed. The blood flowing from his wounds and the extreme fear took the child's consciousness. Cold snowflakes indifferently covered the small body, scarred by fire and seized with terror. The child's faint breath turned into white mist and scattered, seeming to fade away. That was when it happened. An old man who had been alternately looking at Changryingmen, now reduced to ashes, and the child collapsed in the snow, sank down in despair. He was a loyal retainer and physician of Changryingmen. The old man, who had been wailing in guilt for failing to protect the sect leader, discovered something faintly glimmering in the snowfield. It was a necklace with an intricate dragon pattern hanging around the child's neck. Mixed with the heat of the flames and the child's body temperature, the necklace held a faint warmth. Even in that cold snow, the old man grasped the necklace with trembling hands. It was a sacred object, passed down only to the legitimate heir of Changryingmen sect leader. Sect leader. At least this child, I will surely, the old man confirmed. The child's faint breathing and swallowed his tears of blood. The old man lifted the child onto his back and vowing that even if it took 10 years, 20 years, he would repay this grudge, he disappeared without a trace into the darkness where the snowstorm raged, at the moment when Changryingmen was erased from the world's memory. 10 years passed from that day. A deep mountain valley in the north, far removed from the central plains due to the harsh cold, half the year was covered in snow. A place forgotten by the world's people as Solhawichan Hyona. Did you finish chopping wood after waking up so late? Come here and have at least a spoonful of soup. Yes, grandfather. I'll be right there. A booming response that echoed through the mountainside along with the resounding voice. A heavy axe split through the air with a whooshing sound, cleaving logs into firewood. 20-year-old Hyon, the child from that day 10 years ago, had become a sturdy young man who wielded an axe far taller than himself. As if it were a toy beneath a vest made from mountain beast hide, well-trained muscles rippled. But Hyon's eyes, unlike his imposing appearance, were pure and innocent, showing no trace of tragedy. Hyon wiped the beads of sweat on his forehead with his forearm when village children gathered curiously to watch Hyeon's axe work. Hyeon tousled their hair with his large hands, playfully teasing them. Hyeon was simply a strong and kind-hearted woodcutter of Solhawachan. Hyeon headed toward Elder Beck, who had called him. The old man who had rescued the child 10 years ago was now the village chief. And the only physician, receiving everyone's respect. Elder Beck was Hyeon's guardian. And his only family inside a small thatched cottage. Elder Beck was preparing medicinal herbs in front of the furnace. Hyeon emptied the hot soup in one gulp. Grandfather, I had that dream again last night, Hyeon said, scratching his head. The dream where everything burns, people crying out in bright red flames. It seems like someone is desperately calling for me. My chest felt so tight that I couldn't sleep well. Elder Beck's hand, which had been cutting herbs, hesitated for a moment. A flash of pain crossed the old man's wrinkled eyes. But he soon cleared his throat, pretending to be calm, and responded, haha. It's because your body is weak when your energy wanes. You dream such futile dreams. 10 years ago, when I found you unconscious in the snowfield at the village entrance, you had even forgotten your own name. Elder Beck poked at the weakening fire in the furnace with a poker. I can only guess that you lost your memory after experiencing a terrible accident. Forget the past and just live healthily with the name, Hyeon, as you do now. Understand? Hyeon nodded without asking more, but even after finishing the bowl of soup, the tightness in his chest did not easily fade without realizing it. Hyeon fiddled with the cold metal beneath his collar, touching his bare skin. It was the necklace with the dragon pattern that Elder Beck had given him, saying it must be a memento from your parents. A few days later, Hyeon went deeper into the mountains than usual to gather medicinal herbs. It was near the forbidden area called Changryong's tomb, where no one from Solhawachan dared to set foot. That was when it happened. Hyeon stopped walking as if entranced. It was neither the sound of wind nor the sound of beasts. It was a strange pull, as if someone was calling him, or as if a great sorrow was drawing him in. Hyeon instinctively pushed through the bushes and moved forward. Before long, an unbelievable sight unfolded before Hyeon's eyes. Massive ruins buried in snow. Even though 10 years had passed, the enormous charred beams jutted toward the sky like broken spears, testifying to how terrible the flames had been that day. The collapsed stone walls and pillars, blackened by fire, seemed to vomit forth deep sorrow. Hyeon did not understand why he had been drawn to this place, but the moment he saw the ruins, his heart grew cold as if struck by a block of ice, and soon uncontrollable sadness and rage surged up. Tears flowed down his cheeks. Where is this? Hyeon placed his hand on a collapsed pillar of the gate tower. The cold sensation of stone transmitted through his palm to his heart. In that moment, his mind went white. Countless people's screams, the afterimage of a burning night, black hands reaching toward him, and the urgent voice calling, Unhyeon, struck his mind. Hyeon clutched his head and collapsed. Meanwhile, at that hour, strangers arrived at Solhawachan, breaking through the frozen mountain path despite the bitter cold. They wore only thin martial robes, and steel-forged swords hung at their waists in uniform attire. A single sharp sword of Choljeomden was embroidered on their chests. The one who appeared to be their leader was a young man in his mid-20s. Hajin. He possessed cold and tenacious eyes that did not match his age, and an inexplicable killing intent emanated from his scabbard. Hajin went without hesitation to the thatched cottage of Elder Beck, the village chief and physician. Even the sound of his knocking was rude and rough. I wish to see this village's chief. We are from the Orthodox sect Choljeomden of the Central Plains, tracking remnants of the unorthodox sect who have hidden in the north. Elder Beck stopped drying herbs and met them. The old man's wrinkled eyes narrowed. What brings you to such a harsh place? Hajin cut off the old man's words. And got to the point. 10 years ago I heard a rumor that a great sect burned and disappeared. Near this area. By any chance do you remember the fire that night? Or have you ever seen a child? Who survived then? The muscles in Elder Beck's face trembled minutely, but the old man, who had lived decades, did not lose his composure and slowly shook his head. This is such a remote mountain valley, we don't know much about news from the Central Plains 10 years ago. You say my memory is hazy. A fire. You say that's news to me. Hajin stared intently at Elder Beck's face, the old man's calm expression. But Hajin did not miss the subtle agitation beneath and the wariness toward him. Right at that moment, Hyeon, who had been descending from the ruins, faced danger. On the mountain path as the sun set. Grr. A pack of wolves with eyes flashing blood red from hunger surrounded Hyeon. There were at least 5 or 6. Especially the leader of the pack, a massive wolf, was a fierce beast with a head larger than an ordinary wolf. Hyeon quietly lowered the carrying frame on his back and tightened his grip on the hand axe tucked at his waist. An ordinary woodcutter would have frozen in terror or fled from this overwhelming fear. But strangely, Hyeon remained calm. His heart pounded fiercely, but rather than fear, a strange excitement enveloped his body. Gra. The pack leader lost patience and launched its body toward Hyeon. Sharp fangs aimed for Hyeon's nape. That was the moment. Hyeon's clear eyes changed instantaneously. Time seemed to flow slowly. Without time to think, Hyeon instinctively lowered his body. It was not merely crouching down. His soles gripped the ground as if clutching the snow, and his waist bent like a spring, diving beneath the wolf's jaw. As the wolf passed over Hyeon's head, Hyeon kicked off the ground, rising and rotating his body. The hand holding the axe exploded not with arm strength alone, but with the rotational force of his waist and the support of his feet in a single instant. An air-splitting sound. With a sharp noise of the hand axe cutting through the air, it struck precisely at the wolf's flank. Crack. It was not the sound of splitting wood. It was the dull rupturing sound of bone and flesh being crushed. The wolf could not even properly scream, flying back in the direction it came from and rolling in the snow. Blood scattered in a fan shape across the snow. This was not the axe work of a woodcutter. It was the most efficient and brutal movement of an assassin, one who had been trained countless times. As the remaining wolves hesitated in fear, Hyeon gasped at what he had done, surprised by his own actions. How impressive skill. The sound of clapping. From between the trees, Hajin and the Choljeomdan members revealed themselves. They had been watching the entire process of Hyeon dealing with the wolf. Hajin's eyes glinted strangely, as if intrigued, or as if he had seen something filthy. Hajin asked in a cold voice. For an ordinary woodcutter to take down a starving wolf leader in a single strike. Remarkable. What's your name? Hyeon stepped back warily. Who are you? I asked your name. Your age? How long have you lived in this village? Hajin's voice was not a simple question but a sharp interrogation. Hajin's hand was already gripping his sword hilt. If Hyeon showed even the slightest opening, he would draw his sword without hesitation. Hyeon ah. Just then, Elder Beck came running urgently. In the old man's hands was a basket of medicinal herbs. You fool, not even greeting our guests. These are honored guests who have come from the Central Plains. Elder Beck bowed deeply to Hajin. His attitude appeared extremely polite and servile. This is my grandson. I call him Hyeon. As you can see, he's only big in size. When he was young, he fell from that mountain cliff and hit his head badly. Since then, his memory hasn't been intact and he's a bit simple. As for catching the wolf, This fool acted so stupidly that the wolf let its guard down, or it was purely good luck. Elder Beck lightly struck the back of Hyeon's head, scolding him. Hajin looked back and forth between Hyeon and Elder Beck. Memory not intact, about 10 years ago. Hajin smiled meaningfully. I see, Elder. It seems I like this village. I'll need to stay for a few days. I'll impose on you tonight. Elder Beck's face hardened, but he could not refuse. That night, a death-like silence hung over Solhawachan. Choljeomdon members surrounded the village entrance and Elder Beck's house, standing night watch. Inside Elder Beck's thatched cottage, only one small lamp flickered precariously. Elder Beck firmly locked the door. Then he sat heavily before Hyeon. Hyeon was trembling with anxiety, unable to forget the look in the eyes of that man called Hajin whom he had met during the day. Grandfather, why have you been like this? Who are those people? Why are they watching us? Instead of answering, Elder Beck reached into Hyeon's collar and pulled out the dragon-patterned necklace hanging around his neck. Hyeon, I can no longer hide it. Elder Beck's eyes reddened. They are Choljeomdon. 10 years ago, they were at the forefront of the Orthodox sect alliance that annihilated Changryingmen. Changryingmen? It was the very word he had heard at the ruins during the day, the word he had heard in his dreams. What is that? Elder Beck looked straight into Hyeon's eyes and, as if bursting with the tears he had suppressed for 10 years, opened his mouth with a trembling voice. Your name is not Hyeon. Hyeon's breathing seemed to stop. Your real name is Unhyeon. Elder Beck closed his eyes and opened them again, pulling out the last piece of truth he had buried for 10 years. You are the last descendant of Changryingmen, which was destroyed by them 10 years ago. Unhyeon, Changryingmen. Those words struck Unhyeon's mind like a hammer. The burning dreams that tormented him every night, the sorrow of the ruins that had led him there. The instinctive movement that had struck down the wolf, and the sensation of the dragon-patterned necklace around his neck crashed over Unhyeon like a massive wave. Unhyeon, Changryingmen. The two words struck Unhyeon's mind like lightning through the emptiness of 10 years. The forgotten name brought with it fragments of painful memories. The burning gate tower, his parents' blood, the black shadows that had chased him. It was not a nightmare, but Unhyeon's sealed past. Unhyeon clutched his head as if it would split. Get a hold of yourself, Unhyeon. Elder Beck's urgent cry anchored Unhyeon's consciousness. There's no time. Those bastards already suspect you. No, they're almost certain. We hid for 10 years, but in the end, the traces of a dragon cannot be hidden. Unhyeon looked at the old man he had believed to be his only family with confused eyes. Grandfather, then, for 10 years you've been deceiving me? Elder Beck's face twisted with sorrow. It was not deception. I was trying to protect you. 10 years ago, in the flames of annihilation, your father, the sect leader of Changryingmen, entrusted you to me. To preserve your life and continue the bloodline of Changryong. That was the last mission left to me. Unhyeon looked down at the dragon-patterned necklace he was holding. The necklace he had thought was merely a memento now became the weight of his family legacy, crushing his heart. The next morning, the air in Solhawachan was colder and heavier than ever before. Choljeomdon members blocked the village's only entrance. Not only around the village chief's house, but armed martial artists with swords were stationed throughout the village. The peaceful mountain village had become a prison on snow in a single night. Hajin gathered the village residents in the square. We have intelligence that remnants of the northern unorthodox sect have hidden in this village. From now on, Solhawachan is sealed under Choljeomdon's control. No one may enter or leave the village without permission. Hajin's cold gaze turned from among the residents to the particularly large-framed Unhyan and Elder Beck standing beside him. Especially you, village chief, and that, Hyeon, you may not take a single step outside your house without my permission. You must cooperate for the village's safety. The residents murmured in fear. Hajin deliberately isolated Unhyan and Elder Beck from the village people, remnants of the unorthodox sect. With those words alone, wariness and suspicion began to seep into the eyes of neighbors who had been friendly just yesterday. Elder Beck's expression was grim when they returned to the thatched cottage. He's setting a trap. Unhyan, we can delay no longer. Elder Beck led Unhyan to the narrow storage shed behind the house. I didn't teach you martial arts because the moment you learned them, the energy of Changryong would leak from your body and you'd be discovered by those bastards. But now, you must at least learn a way to survive. Elder Beck had Unhyan assume a strange posture. They may be watching. This is not martial arts. It's merely health exercises to endure this northern cold. Understand? What Elder Beck taught was the basic breathing technique of Changryingman. Breathing circulation, drawing breath deeply, gathering it in the dantian, then letting it flow slowly and leisurely through all the body's energy meridians. And the unique footwork for maintaining one's center of gravity without slipping even on frozen ice. Don't think. Feel with your body. Become the wind, become the water. Unhyan focused on Elder Beck's words even in his confusion. And a miracle occurred. The basics of the breathing technique that Elder Beck had expected would take at least a full shichen, Unhyan mastered in just half a shichen. Unhyan's body remembered the sensation it had forgotten for 10 years. When the Azure Dragon breathing technique was added to his body forged by axework, something began to stir within Unhyan. Elder Beck marveled at that wondrous aptitude, but at the same time, his heart felt torn. Because of his own helplessness in having to let that talent rot for 10 years. That afternoon, Hajin personally came to their thatched cottage. Village chief, my soldiers are shivering in this bitter cold. But I hear that on the eastern cliff of this village grows something called flame grass. An herb that makes one forget the cold. Coincidentally, I heard your grandson is this village's best woodcutter and herb gatherer. Elder Beck's face turned pale. Sir Hajin, that place. It's called Death Cliff. One wrong step and it's 1,000-foot drop. No one goes there. That's exactly why your grandson must go. Hajin tapped Unhyan's shoulder provokingly. Could it be? Are you scared? Or is there something bothering you that makes you want to defy my order? It was an obvious trap. Refuse and they'd find an excuse to pressure him, accept, and who knew what would happen on that dangerous cliff. Unhyan stepped forward, blocking Elder Beck. I'll go and return. Unhyan headed to Death Cliff carrying only rope and a herb-digging hoe. Hajin smiled and attached 2 Choljeomdan members under the pretense of escort. The cliff was like the entrance to hell, true to its name. Biting winds howled between the frozen rock faces. Unhyan climbed the precarious rock face with the skill he'd developed over 10 years in the mountains. After climbing for some time, the moment he reached a narrow icy path midway up the cliff. Above Unhyan's head, one of the Choljeomdan members who had been escorting him secretly kicked his foot. Oops, sorry. The massive boulder kicked by his foot fell toward Unhyan at a terrifying speed. There was nowhere to dodge. To the right was rock face, to the left 1,000-foot drop. Whew! Unhyan's eyes widened. In the moment death's terror struck, Unhyan's body reacted first. The health exercises he had learned from Elder Beck. Instead of leaping away from the falling boulder, Unhyan pushed strength into his soles and kicked off the ice. His body tilted toward the rock face. Then he stepped on a tiny crevice in the cliff with his toes and rotated his body by springing his waist like a coil. The boulder tore through Unhyun's outer garment and fell precariously into the abyss below. With a single leap and rotation, Unhyun passed through the point where the boulder had fallen and landed on a safe rocky ledge above. The movement was agile like a monkey yet graceful as if gliding. It was the basic evasion footwork of the Azure Dragon Sword technique, the Dragon Flow Step. Even Unhyun himself gasped for breath, not realizing how he had moved. Below the cliff, Hajin's lips twisted upward as he watched the entire scene through a telescope. Dragon Flow Step. I haven't seen that in 10 years. So he was alive after all. Hajin no longer needed to test him. When Unhyun descended from the cliff, Hajin was already waiting before him. The Choljeomdan members who had served as escorts had already disappeared. Did you find the herbs, Unhyun? Unhyun's heart seemed to stop. What do you mean? The act is over. You hid well like a little rat for 10 years. The last remaining bloodline of Changryingmen. Hajin's hand moved toward his sword hilt. Cold and heavy killing intent blanketed the snowfield. If I take your head back to the Central Plains, how great my achievement will be. Thank you for letting me finish a 10-year-old mission. Hajin's sword slid from its sheath. It was an iron sword with a blood-red aura. Remnant of Changryong. Hajin's sword flew mercilessly toward Unhyun's neck. Unhyun was so paralyzed with fear he couldn't even think to dodge. That was when it happened. Your opponent is not that child. Bang! With a heavy air-splitting sound, Elder Beck wedged himself between the two. Elder Beck struck the side of Hajin's blade with his gaunt old palm. Hajin's sword lost its trajectory and bounced away, and Hajin himself staggered back 2 steps from the impact. Unhyun's eyes widened. His grandfather's hand, which had only handled herbs all his life, had deflected a steel sword. Elder Beck no longer stooped. The aura of a master hidden for 10 years burst forth. Though old and weak, the foundation of that energy was deep and azure. How dare! This old rat was hiding martial arts. Hajin recovered from his shock and was consumed by rage. The palm technique of Changryingmen. Good. I'll take both the old rat and the young rat. Hajin swung his sword again. Choljeomdan's sword technique was heavy and destructive. Iron sword chain. The sword covered Elder Beck with momentum as if to split a mountain. Azure Dragon Wave. Elder Beck did not dodge but thrust out his palm. Blue internal energy surged from his palm like a wave and collided with Hajin's sword chi. Quang! A tremendous shockwave kicked up a snowstorm. Elder Beck held his ground, but Hajin was pushed back once more. Elder Beck's internal energy was a level deeper. You bastard! Hajin grew even more enraged that he had been pushed back. But he did not lose his composure. He perceived that the old man's breathing was growing rough, that while his internal energy was strong, his energy and blood had declined. The old man won't last long. Hajin increased his speed. Instead of heavy sword techniques, he unleashed fast and sharp moves in succession. Elder Beck became desperate in defense, and his wounds gradually increased. Finally, Hajin's sword broke through Elder Beck's defense and deeply cut his left shoulder. Ku! Elder Beck fell to his knees. Red blood stained the white snow. Grandfather! Unhyun cried out and tried to run forward. Don't come! Elder Beck shouted, coughing blood. Hajin raised his sword high to deliver the final blow to the fallen old man. In that moment, Elder Beck looked back at Unhyun. In those eyes, flames burned instead of tears. Unhyun, now, run. Elder Beck gathered all his remaining internal energy. As if reaching toward Hajin, he instead struck the ground. Azure Dragon shakes heaven. A massive crack formed centered on Elder Beck's palm, and the frozen earth and snow piles surged up like a giant wall. Hajin's vision was completely blocked. This This old man. Beyond the wall of surging earth and snow, Elder Beck's last cry could be heard. Survive. You must survive and go to the Central Plains and find the Changriong sword. That is your destiny. Grandfather. Grandfather. Anhian reached out beyond the collapsing earth, but all he grasped was cold air. Bang. Hajin finally smashed through the earth pile and burst out. Elder Beck's breath was already fading. You bastard. Hajin's murderous eyes turned toward Anhian. Instead of freezing in place, Anhian was engulfed by rage and sorrow that seemed to burn through his entire body. He had lost the father who had raised him for 10 years. Anhian gritted his teeth and turned his body. The footwork Elder Beck had taught him. Anhian was no longer the woodcutter, Hyon. Anhian instinctively deployed the Azure Dragon footwork and threw his body into the deep forest of the snowy mountain. Chase him. We absolutely cannot let him escape. Choljeomdan members surrounded Anhian from all sides. But the current Anhian was not the dull woodcutter they had known. Anhian slipped between trees and rocks as if flowing like water. Sorrow and rage drew out Anhian's potential to its limits. How long had he run? Anhian shook off his pursuers and stood on the highest ridge overlooking Solhawachan. The small snow-covered village was stained with blood and flames. It had been the only home that raised him. Anhian shed hot tears. 10 years of peace had vanished like a mirage. The name, Hyon, the simple life of a woodcutter, all had turned to ash. Anhian pulled out the dragon-patterned necklace from his collar and clenched it. The metal that had been cold grew hot as if responding to Anhian's rage and sorrow. Anhian wiped his tears. In those eyes that had been so clear now resided cold fury and resolve beyond sorrow. Hajin, Choljeomdan, and all those bastards who destroyed Changriangman. Anhian turned his back on his only home and turned his head toward the south. Elder Beck's last words echoed in his ears. Find the Changriang sword. Anhian took his first step toward revenge and his destiny, alone on the snow-covered mountain path. The path to escape the mountains of death was desperate. Anhian ran, rolled, and hid for days on end. He endured hunger by eating snow, and quenched thirst by chewing ice. The guilt of not even being able to make a grave for Elder Beck crushed his heart. But the last words, survive and find the Changriang sword, whipped him onward. Hajin's pursuit squad had chased him to the brink several times. Each time, Anhian instinctively deployed the basic footwork and breathing technique Elder Beck had taught him. He triggered avalanches to block paths and disguised beast tracks to shake off pursuit. It was a miraculous survival combining 10 years of a woodcutter's experience treating mountains as home with the Azure Dragon instinct carved into his bloodline. And finally, Anhian escaped the realm of the terrible northern winds. A landscape Anhian had never seen in his life unfolded before his eyes. Not an endless snowfield, but earth where yellow dust flew. A massive checkpoint where countless people came and went. The Central Plains. It was a gigantic border town incomparable to Solhawachan. Noisy clamor, diverse accents, the smell of greasy food. Everything was unfamiliar. Anhian, wearing northern leather clothes like rags, was in itself an alien existence. Anhian searched his pockets, but all his hands caught was the cold dragon-patterned necklace. No information, no money. He had vowed revenge for Elder Beck, but what threatened Anhian right now was not the grand conspiracies of the martial world, but hunger gnawing at his stomach. Anhian stared blankly at the heat pouring out from a shabby dumpling shop. That was when it happened. Exclamation mark. A chilling sensation sweeping down his spine. Anhian turned his head. Across the street at an inn, 3 men on the second-floor balcony were staring down at Anhian intently. Their attire was the same as Hajin's. The sharp sword embroidered on their chests the mark of Chuljeomden. Hajin was not there, but their eyes were as tenacious and cold as his. They found me. The Chuljeomden members exited the inn and began crossing the street. Unhyeon reflexively turned and plunged into the crowd. But the unfamiliar geography and numerous crowds only held Unhyeon back. A dead-end alley. Unhyeon gasped for breath and looked back. 3 elite Chuljeomden warriors drew their swords and slowly closed in on the alley. You've had a hard time crossing the snowy mountains, little rat of Changryong. We were skeptical when we heard Sir Hajin let you escape. But you really crawled all the way here. Elder Beck's blood flashed through Unhyeon's mind. The instinct to flee and the rage to stand and fight clashed violently. Survive. The last words did not mean to run away. They meant to survive and find the Changryong sword. If he ran away here again, Elder Beck's death would be a dog's death. Instead of running, Unhyeon pulled out the old hand axe tucked at his waist. It was the axe that had been like a friend, chopping wood for 10 years. Exclamation mark. The Chuljeomden members were momentarily surprised that Unhyeon did not run but drew his axe, then soon sneered. How dare. The insect draws a blade. The member at the front struck first. Chuljeomden's sword technique was heavy and linear. The sword aimed at Unhyeon's shoulder flew with a metallic sound. Unhyeon recalled the footwork Elder Beck had taught him, the dragon flow step. But Unhyeon's movement, with no real combat experience, was clumsy. He dodged the sword but lost his center and staggered. Is that all you've got? The second member's sword dug into his exposed flank. Simultaneously, the third member blocked Unhyeon's escape route. In the moment of crisis, Unhyeon deployed the basic breathing technique Elder Beck had taught as health exercises. Rage, sorrow, and the desperation to survive mingled together and awakened the internal energy that had been sleeping for 10 years. Thwack. Unhyeon did not dodge but struck the blade directly with his forearm, channeling the breathing technique. An unbelievably dull sound rang out, impossible to believe it was the collision of metal and bone. Who? The member who had swung the sword screamed from the shock that felt like his wrist would break and staggered back. His sword trembled. All 3 members were shocked. That was not the mere strength of a woodcutter. Unhyeon was also surprised by the change that occurred in his body, but there was no time to rest. Kill him. The flustered members all covered Unhyeon simultaneously. 3 swords from different angles aimed at Unhyeon's heart, neck, and dantian. In that moment, Unhyeon's body moved instinctively again. That sensation of dodging the wolf's fangs in the snowy mountains. Unhyeon did not dodge the first sword that flew. Instead, he threw his body toward that sword. Then he strongly deflected the side of the sword with the head of his hand axe. Clang. The sword's trajectory twisted and turned toward a comrade's shoulder beside him. Arg. This bastard. As the remaining 2 recoiled their swords in shock, Unhyeon did not miss that gap. Dragon flow step. This time it was not clumsy. Like a fish riding currents, he dove into their midst. And he threw not his axe, but his fist. The fist infused with basic breathing technique struck one man's solar plexus precisely. Who? The member collapsed, breath knocked out. Now only 1 remained. But Unhyeon too was gasping for breath from immature internal energy deployment and fierce movement. Shallow cuts already formed on his shoulder and thigh, blood flowing down. This monster. The sole remaining member was terrified but soon showed a vile smile. You've reached your limit too. The member swung his sword with his last strength. Unhyeon tried to dodge, but his injured leg would not obey. Just before the sword carved Unhyeon's chest, Unhyeon saw barrels of alcohol precariously stacked in a corner of the alley. Unhyeon squeezed out his last strength and instead of dodging the sword, rolled to the side and kicked the barrels. Crash. Dozens of barrels covered the member. The member swung his sword to split the barrels, but in that moment Anhyun grabbed a broken barrel piece and struck the back of his neck. The member collapsed without even a scream. Anhyun leaned his back against the wall, gasping roughly. His first real combat. He had taken down 3 elite warriors, but the price was high. His entire body hurt as if torn apart, and the bleeding would not stop. Huff, huff. As the adrenaline faded, extreme fatigue and pain surged in. Anhyun staggered out of the alley. He had to escape before more pursuers came. But Anhyun's consciousness gradually blurred from blood loss and exhaustion. The noisy market sounds grew distant. Anhyun could endure no longer and collapsed beneath a dark, secluded wall. In his fading vision, he saw someone's straw shoes approaching. Anhyun thought it was another Cheoljeomdan member and tried to resist, but could not move a finger. And so, he fell into deep darkness. When Anhyun opened his eyes again, what stung his nose was not the smell of blood, but thick herbal fragrance. Anhyun lay on a hard bed. When he tried to rise, searing pain surged from his bandaged shoulder and thigh. "If you didn't die, lie still. I won't care if it festers." A prickly, blunt voice. When Anhyun turned his head, a middle-aged man was grinding herbs while glancing at Anhyun. At first glance, he was an ordinary physician, but his eyes alone were sharp as blades. "Who are you? Where is this? You're noisy. I picked you up because I couldn't stand watching you die like a little rat. I would have left you, but the smell coming off you was so terrible. Not the smell of blood, but that truly disgusting, iron sword, smell." The physician roughly set down the bowl containing bandages and medicine. Anhyun instinctively felt his chest. It was gone. The dragon-patterned necklace that should have been around his neck had disappeared. My necklace." Anhyun cried out in terror and tried to rise. The physician clicked his tongue and picked up the necklace from the bedside and tossed it to Anhyun. "This, you mean?" Anhyun caught the necklace, then froze at the physician's next words. "I haven't seen this in 10 years. Changryingman's dragon pattern." Anhyun's heart seemed to stop. "Who are you really?" The physician stopped grinding herbs and looked straight at Anhyun. "I'm just someone trying to repay a debt. 10 years ago, I was a physician who survived thanks to Changryingman. Now I'm reduced to hiding while gathering herbs like this." The physician's eyes grew distant as if recalling the past. "I once lived as Changryingman's eyes and ears. I was called K-Wuxia, a former Changryingman intelligence agent." K-Wuxia looked at Anhyun's wounds and clicked his tongue. "You bastard, you forcibly drew out internal energy when you can't even properly circulate basic breathing technique. That's why you nearly died. The ones you knocked down were third-rate Cheoljeomdan elite trash. If you'd met Hajin or higher-ups, you'd already be past finding your corpse." K-Wuxia threw additional information about the background of the annihilation 10 years ago. Cheoljeomdan were just dogs. What truly unleashed those dogs and cut Changryingman's breath were the hypocritical alliance leaders of the Central Plains Orthodox sect. They feared Changryingman's power and coveted something that Changryingman was protecting. Anhyun recalled Elder Beck's last words and asked with trembling voice, "The Changryong sword. Do you know about the Changryong sword? I must find it." K-Wuxia snorted. "The Changryong sword? It vanished the night of the annihilation. The sect leader tried to protect it. Tisk. You want to find something from legends? Foolish bastard. I must find it." Anhyun cried out, forgetting even the pain of his wounds. "That is the only path left to me." It was Elder Beck's last words. K-Wuxia stared at Anhyun's eyes. In those eyes was not despair, but unbreakable will. It resembled the eyes of the sect leader he had served 10 years ago. "Fine. Hyukya sighed. I should repay my debt anyway. Now that I've met the surviving lord, I must complete my final mission. Hyukya retrieved a small herb pouch from a hidden space in the wall. I don't know the whereabouts of the Changryong sword itself. But there was someone tracking the traces of that sword. Hyukya told Unhyeon the destination. Go to Nikayang, the heart of the Central Plains. There's an old inn called Gwajore. Find the owner and deliver this herb pouch. And say, I've come to repay the northern debt. Then, they'll show you the next path. Hyukya tossed Unhyeon a set of ordinary Central Plains clothing and a purse containing travel money. The bounty on your head will be enormous. Since Choljeomdon lost you, a wanted order will fall across the entire Central Plains. Never reveal your identity. Especially, that clumsy footwork you instinctively used. Never use Changryingman's martial arts. Use it if you want to die. A few days later, with wounds barely healed, Unhyeon changed into the clothes Hyukya gave him. Shedding his northern rags and appearing as an ordinary Central Plains youth, Unhyeon bowed deeply to Hyukya. This grace. Enough, get lost. And don't die. The moment you die, I can never repay my debt either. Hyukya waved his hand dismissively. Unhyeon left Hyukya's hiding place and stepped back into the noisy border town streets. Everything was different from a few days ago. Unhyeon was no longer the lost woodcutter, Hyeon. As Unhyeon, the last descendant of Changryingman, he took his first step on a new journey toward Nikayang, the center of his destiny and revenge. 2 weeks after leaving the border town where he met Hyukya, Unhyeon finally arrived at Nikayang, the heart of the Central Plains. A vastness incomparable to Solhawachan. A 9-story tower reaching for the sky, endlessly connected walls, and the waves of hundreds of thousands of people filling the space within. Even though he wore the ordinary cotton clothes Hyukya had obtained instead of rough northern leather garments, Unhyeon was as alien as a lost pebble in this massive current. The expensive smell of silk and spices, the laughter of noble ladies, and the sounds of carriage wheels filled the streets. But beneath that splendor lurked foul-smelling back alleys, beggar gangs, sizing up passers-by with sinister eyes, and the dark struggles of martial artists not hiding the sharp sound of metal. A city where righteousness and wickedness, wealth and poverty mixed like a furnace. Unhyeon instinctively knew this place could be both the land of opportunity he sought and the grave that would swallow him whole. Unhyeon fingered the small herb pouch in his breast. The only clue Hyukya had given him. Gwajore Inn. After much inquiry, Unhyeon found an old inn located not in Nakyang's bustling district but in a remote corner. True to its name, rather than making one want to return, it was a place with an ominous air that made one feel they should leave immediately. Inside the inn was dark even at midday, and the only customer was an old drunkard in the corner. Behind the dust-covered counter, a gaunt innkeeper yawned while wiping cups. Unhyeon swallowed and approached, ordering a cup of the cheapest rice wine. And the moment the owner served the drink, he slipped the herb pouch onto the counter as Hyukya had instructed. Innkeeper, by any chance, is there someone here who accepts northern debts? The innkeeper's wiping hand stopped. But without even glancing at the herb pouch, he stared directly at Unhyeon's face. What beggar comes here spouting nonsense? Go find medicine at a pharmacy and collect debts at a money shop. This is a place that sells liquor. A cold rejection. Unhyeon was flustered. There was no way Hyukya had given him wrong information. Just as Unhyeon was about to say something again, the inn door burst open roughly. Rumble. 5 or 6 thugs barged in. They wore short blades at their waists, and on their shabby clothes was a small mark indicating they were from Nakyang's Haomun branch. It was one of the numerous minor sects that had participated in Changryingman's annihilation 10 years ago. Innkeeper, you've prepared this month's rent, right? Including what you owed last month, it's double. The one who appeared to be the leader pounded the counter with his fist and growled. The innkeeper sighed and shook his head. Business these days. Shut up. The thug's eyes turned to Unhyun sitting in the corner. There's an unfamiliar bastard here. This one looks like he has a fat purse. Rob him and pay the rent. Two thugs approached Unhyun with smirks. Hey, brother. You look like a country bumpkin. Did you enjoy sightseeing in Nikayang? You should pay for the tour. Unhyun recalled Hyukia's warning. Never reveal your identity, especially Changri Ingman's martial arts. Unhyun tried to stand quietly. I'm just passing through. Passing through where? One bastard roughly grabbed Unhyun's shoulder. In that moment, Unhyun did not use martial arts. Instead, he used the instinctive strength of a woodcutter, forged by 10 years of axe work. With his shoulder still grabbed, he twisted his waist and lowered his center. The thug tried to pull Unhyun but instead lost his balance from the rebound as if pulling a massive boulder and tumbled forward. Bang! The thug smashed his head into a table and fell. You bastard. Instantly, the air inside the inn turned vicious. The Haomun group all drew their blades in unison. You dare touch Haomun. The innkeeper had already hidden beneath the counter. I can't fight. Unhyun immediately turned and burst out the back door of the inn. Catch that bastard. You think you can run after owing Haomun in Nikayang? The back door led to narrow, complicated alleys. Unhyun ran desperately with the sense he'd used to shake off pursuit in the snowy mountains. But this was not a snow-covered mountain. All the alleys looked similar, a succession of dead ends. The Haomun group closed their encirclement skillfully like catching rats. They knew the geography here like the backs of their hands. Over here, stupid northern country bumpkin. Unhyun ran, overturning market stalls and pushing through clotheslines. But the more he did, the more Haomun members joined. They shouted, thief, and now even Nakyang's patrol guards who knew nothing began chasing Unhyun. Unhyun's breath reached his chin. A dead-end alley. Kiki, what will you do now, little rat? The Haomun group gripped their blades tighter and slowly approached. Unhyun didn't even have his hand axe. As Hyukia had said, he had abandoned all weapons to disguise himself as an ordinary traveler. Kill him. At the leader's command, 3 blades flew simultaneously toward Unhyun's chest and abdomen. There was nowhere to dodge. The moment the terror of death struck, Unhyun's mind went cold. The sensation from killing the wolf in the snowy mountains, dodging the boulder at the cliff, and fighting Choljeomdon at the border town merged into one. Hyukia had said not to use Changri Ingman's martial arts. But Unhyun was now instinctively deploying the basic breathing technique Elder Beck had taught him and the dragon flow step footwork. Unhyun did not retreat backward. Instead, he took 1 step straight into the 3 blades. And he extended his hand. It was not a defensive movement. His hand blade transformed as if it were a sharp sword. The first offensive technique of the Azure Dragon Sword technique, forgotten for 10 years yet sleeping in his bloodline. Azure Dragon Fang. The dragon's molars! ! Unhyun's hand blade struck precisely at the wrist gripping the first blade's handle. Crack! The dull sound of bone breaking. Arg! Unhyun did not stop. Rotating his body with dragon flow step footwork, he pressed down on the second man's elbow joint with his own elbow. Into the third man's abdomen, he drove a fist infused with the basic breathing technique. Everything happened in an instant. 3 thugs collapsed without even properly screaming. It was not a simple fight. It was the perfectly calculated movement of an assassin. This monster. The remaining Haomun group stepped back in terror. Even Unhyun himself looked as if he couldn't believe what his hands had done. It was destructive power he couldn't have imagined when he was Hyeon. Unhyun no longer paid attention to the pursuers and headed back to Gwajore Inn. The inn was empty unlike before. Neither the gaunt owner nor the drunkard was there. The herb pouch Unhyun had slid over earlier still lay on the counter. And beside it was an additional small wooden plaque marked second floor. It had been the first test. Unhyun climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. The innermost room, its door slightly ajar. Inside the room sat not the gaunt innkeeper, but a woman wearing splendid silk clothes. She looked like a pleasure house madam, but her eyes were 10 times sharper than most martial artists. She held a long tobacco pipe and looked Unhyun over. You caused unnecessary commotion. The guest who came bearing a northern debt. This woman was the real information agent. It was the Haomun bastards. They started the trouble first. Enough. The woman exhaled a long stream of smoke. Since you were sent by Wuxia, I expected an old fox to come, but an unripened tiger cub came instead. I tested you. If you'd died without anyone knowing at the hands of those Haomun bastards, you'd have no qualifications to repay Wuxia's debt. Unhyun clenched his fists. I want to know the whereabouts of the Changryong sword. The woman laughed. The Changryong sword? Child, you think such a thing still remains? That night 10 years ago, the Changryong sword burned and vanished with the sect leader. Unhyun's heart went cold. That can't be. Elder Beck. Wuxia. However, the woman continued as if enjoying Unhyun's despair. The sword disappeared, but the sword's trace remains. The Changryong sword wasn't originally just one thing. The sword and the map that completes it were a pair. A map? That's right. The Changryong heavenly map, where Changryingman's true secret vault, or something even greater, is hidden. I heard that only with that map can the Changryong sword display its true power. 10 years ago, they invaded Changryingman because they were after that map. The woman tapped her cigarette ash. And coincidentally, one fragment of that Changryong heavenly map will appear 3 days from now at the Black Lotus secret auction, held here in Nikayang. Auction. Unhyun thought of the travel money Wuxia had given him. It was nowhere near enough. That expression says you have no money. That auction isn't a place you can enter with money alone. You must prove your qualifications. Conveniently, the day before the auction, the Dragon Tiger Martial Competition is held. It's a bloody competition where people gather to gain qualifications to participate in the auction, or ruffians trying to make a fortune. The winner of that competition receives auction participation rights and a modest prize. Meanwhile, at that hour, the southern checkpoint heading to Nikayang, a group of riders was approaching, raising dust. The one at the front was Hajin with his cold eyes. One of his subordinates approached and reported, Sir Hajin, the traces of the bastard we lost at the border town end here. But we found the corpses of the 3 pursuit members we sent. Hajin's brow furrowed. Corpses? Yes. One had his wrist shattered, one had his elbow destroyed, and the last one's solar plexus was caved in. They're not sword wounds. They appear to have been struck by fist or palm techniques. Hajin stopped his horse and looked north, toward where Nikayang lay. Chilling tenacity appeared in his eyes. The little rat fleeing from the snowy mountains has begun to bare its fangs. Good. Let's see how far it struggles with that clumsy martial arts. We go to Nikayang. He'll definitely be there. Back at Gwajore Inn, Unhyun was listening to the woman's words. A martial competition. The first real combat at the border town, and the alley fight just now. Unhyun felt he was growing stronger, but at the same time realized how inexperienced he was. But there was no choice. The Changryong heavenly map. That was the only path to fulfill Elder Beck's last words. Unhyun looked at the woman and spoke in a low, resolute voice. That martial competition, I will participate. When Nakyang's splendid surface shone under the sun, the underground that the light did not reach boiled with human greed. The place where Unhyun arrived under the guidance of the Gwajore Inn mistress was a massive underground cavity connected to the city's sewers. The moment he entered, decades-old mold, damp earth smell, and nauseating stench of blood stung his nose. This was the heart of Nakyang's underworld, where the Dragon Tiger martial competition was held. Hundreds of torches illuminated the bizarre stalactites of the enormous limestone cave, and their shadows swayed like beasts over the faces of those standing on the martial stage. In the center was a wide dirt martial platform that had turned blood red from being packed with blood and sweat. The audience seats were submerged in darkness, but the hundreds, thousands of glinting eyes were not aimed at the martial stage. They were targeting the entry ticket to the Black Lotus secret auction, and the fragment of the Changryong heavenly map that the final victor holding that ticket would obtain. Unhyun mixed in among the participants under the alias Hyeon. Those surrounding him were uniformly extraordinary. A giant with occult tattoos covering his body wielding a massive iron mace. A descendant of a fallen sect wearing silk clothes but with eyes like a viper, bounty hunters with cunning eyes fingering daggers. All were masters who did not hide their killing intent. Among them, Unhyun's presence with no weapon and wearing only worn cotton clothes was as alien as a deer among lions. First match. The Western killer, Cholson. Against, who knows where he rolled from, Hyeon. With the announcer's cry, Unhyun's first opponent stepped onto the martial stage. The tattooed giant, Cholson. From the audience seats, as if no one had bet money on the country bumpkin, Hyeon, jeering mockery poured forth. Kahaha. You won't even be able to collect your bones, brat. Cholson shook the ground and swung his iron mace, striking the martial stage floor. Fragments scattered in all directions. Unhyun recalled Hyukya's warning, do not use Changryingman's martial arts. Unhyun took a deep breath. Basic breathing technique. A body forged by 10 years of axe work. Cholson charged again, swinging the iron mace over his head. The metallic sound cutting through the wind seemed to tear at the ears. Unhyun did not dodge. Instead, he took one step into that heavy pressure. The instant the iron mace grazed Unhyun's hair, Unhyun lowered his body and dove into the giant's embrace, into the mace's blind spot. And the breathing technique Elder Beck had taught as health exercises. The internal energy drawn up with that technique was loaded into his shoulder, and he rammed straight into the giant's solar plexus. Crunch. It was not the sound of flesh striking flesh. It was the terrible rupturing sound of the giant's sternum caving inward and shattering. Cholson, not even realizing what had happened to him, his massive body curled like a round ball and flew backward. The audience seats instantly fell silent as if cold water had been poured on them. The next match was twins who used throwing stars. They tried to confuse Unhyun with dazzling footwork. But Unhyun read their trajectories in advance with the instinct he'd used tracking wolf movements in the snowy mountains. Unhyun's movements were not flashy. He simply moved along the most efficient path, dodging the throwing stars while simultaneously shattering both men's elbow joints precisely with his hand blades. The next match again. Unhyun faced an opponent with a sword. Before the opponent could even draw and thrust the sword, Unhyun had already twisted the opponent's wrist to snatch the sword, and struck down the opponent's collarbone with the sword's spine to neutralize him. All movements were without excess, aiming only for destruction. It was neither orthodox sect techniques nor unorthodox sect tricks. Only efficiency and instinct. Like a beast's fight, the fastest way to incapacitate an opponent. The name, Hyeon, began to circulate among the audience in the darkness. That bastard. What exactly is his identity? Such martial arts from the north? It's not martial arts. That's just an assassin. An efficient assassin. Thus Unhyeon, covered in blood, finally reached the finals. On the finals martial stage, Unhyeon's final opponent was the rising star of Huksamun, Gwakshoon. Huksamun. Words Hyukya had spoken flashed through Unhyeon's mind. 10 years ago during Changryingman's destruction, a hyena-like sect that followed behind the Orthodox sect alliance. Pillaging from burning Changryingman and mutilating the corpses of surviving disciples. Gwakshoon was barely in his 20s, but his eyes were filled with cruelty and arrogance unbefitting his age. He wore a sneer as he unwound the long iron chain coiled like a snake around his waist and dragged it on the floor. I heard you're a northern country bumpkin. Looking at your movements, quite instinctive. Just like the remnants of Changryingmen who died 10 years ago, slow and stupid. Unhyeon's eyes sank cold as ice. Those bastards also showed beast-like movements like you before dying. In the end, they all begged for their lives under my father's chains. Gwakshoon swung his chain. With a metallic sound, the chain cut through the air like a whip, aiming for Unhyeon's ankle. Unhyeon deployed Dragon Flow Step, the footwork Elder Beck had taught him, dodging narrowly. Still clumsy, but instinct led his body. Oh, you're quite good at dodging. But how long can you keep it up? The chain's attacks continued without pause. Striking the floor, cutting through the air, aiming at Unhyeon's entire body with unpredictable trajectories. Gwakchun's vicious provocations did not stop either. My father told me, Changryingmen bastards were hypocrites with only shiny exteriors. The sect leader bastard died running away, abandoning his wife and children, and the disciples. Kahaha. Those female disciples' screams. In that moment, the thread of reason snapped in Unhyeon's mind. Elder Beck's blood. His parents' burning corpses. Unhyeon's eyes became bloodshot. The sleeping blood of the Azure Dragon boiled up. The rage and sorrow suppressed for 10 years drew out Unhyeon's potential to its limits, accelerating his awakening. Die, country bumpkin. Gwakshoon noticed the change in Unhyeon's eyes and threw the sharp weight at the chain's end directly toward Unhyeon's neck. Unhyeon no longer dodged. He extended his hand straight toward the chain. The technique instinctively used in Nakyang's back alley. The first offensive technique of the Azure Dragon Sword technique. Azure Dragon Fang. Like a dragon's molars biting the chain, Unhyeon's hand blade struck precisely at the center of the flying chain. Clang. The steel chain, struck by bare hands, snapped in two and bounced away. What? Gwakchun's eyes filled with shock. Unhyeon did not miss that gap. He dove into Gwakchun's embrace with Dragon Flow Step footwork. And drove his palm, loaded with rage, into Gwakchun's chest. The basic breathing technique became explosive internal energy, crumpling Gwakchun's chest armor like paper. Ba, Chong, Ryong. Gwakshoon looked down at his chest, unable to finish his last words, and collapsed. Victory. The audience seats fell into silence. An old man from the competition's organizing side came forward and handed the championship prize to Unhyeon with trembling hands. It was an old parchment scroll. A fragment of the Changryong heavenly map. Just as Unhyeon grasped the scroll. From the audience in the darkness, the highest VIP seats. Clap, clap, clap. Slow, arrogant applause rang out. Impressive. Truly impressive. The little rat I lost in the snowy mountains has already learned to imitate a tiger cub. That voice. Unhyeon's entire body froze like ice. When he raised his head, under the torchlight was revealed a cold face he could not forget even after 10 years. Hajin. He was at the martial competition venue. He was not a tournament participant. From the beginning, he had been a guest, watching all of this. Hajin leapt down from the VIP seats and strode to the center of the martial stage. In his hand was still the blood-red iron sword. Sir Hajin. There are rules here. The organizing old man tried to block him, but staggered back, overwhelmed by the killing intent emanating from Hajin's sword. I was thinking of casting a net over all of Nikayang to find you. But you've saved me the trouble. Not Hyeon, but I should call you Unhyun, shouldn't I? Hajin's last words echoed throughout the underground cave. Remnant of Changryong. The audience murmured. Unhyun firmly tucked the scroll into his breast. Elder Baek's nemesis. The beginning of all tragedy. Unhyun and Hajin clashed again on the blood-stained martial stage. Hajin's sword moved first. The heavy and destructive sword technique that had cut down Elder Baek in Solhwachan, Iron Sword Chan. But the current Unhyun was not the woodcutter Hyeon of that time. Unhyun did not meet the sword head-on. He dove to Hajin's flank with dragon flow step footwork. Real combat at the border town, and just now, countless bloody fights in the martial competition had sharpened Unhyun's senses to be like a beast's. Hajin was surprised that his sword had cut only empty air. Are you only going to dodge? Just as Hajin recovered his sword to strike again, Unhyun's fist drove first into Hajin's side. Thwack. Despite wearing chest armor, Hajin staggered from the shock that felt like his organs were twisting. Unhyun's fist was not a simple fist. Beyond the basic breathing technique, it carried heavy internal energy where the Azure Dragon's energy stirred. Unhyun began to overwhelm Hajin. Hajin's sword was heavy, but Unhyun's movements were faster. When Hajin's sword moved once, Unhyun moved twice. 3 times, targeting Hajin's openings. You bastard. How dare you? Hajin could not accept that he was being pushed back by the little rat cub from 10 years ago. He was Cholgeomdn's finest elite. Die. Iron Sword Storm. Hajin pulled out his secret technique. The sword swept like a storm, covering Unhyun's entire body. Unhyun closed his eyes in the center of that storm. And instinctively deployed another technique carved into his bloodline. Not Azure Dragon Fang, that shatters swords. Not blocking the sword, but a defensive technique that received and redirected the sword's flow. Azure Dragon Coil. A dragon coiling up a pillar. Unhyun's 2 hands swept past, enveloping Hajin's blade. Hajin's powerful sword chi did not cut Unhyun's body but, like a great dragon climbing a pillar, rode along Unhyun's arms and scattered into the air. And Unhyun's palm struck precisely at Hajin's chest, now defenseless having lost his sword's trajectory. Hu. Hajin coughed blood and tumbled onto the martial stage floor. Unhyun approached to end Hajin's life. In that moment, Hajin, his face twisted with humiliation and rage, pulled out a small obsidian from his breast and struck it on the floor. Bang! The obsidian shattered and a pillar of black smoke burst through the underground cave's ceiling toward the sky. It was an emergency signal flare calling Cholgeomdn's main force stationed in Nikayang. Kiki, even if I die here, you'll be buried here too. Remnant of Changryong. Soon Cholgeomdn will collapse this cave. The cave began to stir. The audience screamed and rushed toward the narrow exit. Unhyun looked down at fallen Hajin. He could cut that bastard's throat right now. But at the same time, he too would be trapped in Cholgeomdn's encirclement and die. Survive. Elder Baek's last words. And in his breast, the fragment of the Changryong heavenly map he had just obtained. Unhyun had to make a decision. Just then, a masked figure seemingly sent by the Gwajore Inn mistress appeared from the darkness and grabbed Unhyun's arm. This way. Don't stand there stupidly. It's a secret passage to escape. Unhyun looked one last time at Hajin glaring at him while bleeding, and left ice-cold words. Your life. I'll leave it borrowed for now. Unhyun followed the masked figure and hid his body in the dark secret passage amid the chaos. Hajin, bleeding, glared at Unhyun's disappearing back with eyes of burning hatred. Barely escaping the underground cave, Unhyun returned to the secret room of Gwajore Inn. Unhyun finally unrolled the fragment of the Changryong heavenly map, under torchlight. It was a map made of special leather, old and tough, telling of 10 years' passage. But the map did not point to the location where the Changryong sword was hidden. What was drawn on the map was a strange mountain range Unhyun had never seen, and at its center, a massive whirlpool pattern drawn in red ink. Rather than the location of treasure, it pointed to a place of sealing, where something was powerfully suppressed and imprisoned. Unhyun's journey, beyond finding the Changryong sword, was heading toward a greater mystery hidden in the truth of the annihilation 10 years ago. Nakyang's underground secret room. The torchlight's shadows writhed like snakes over the fragment of the Changryong heavenly map. It was not a map of wealth and power. It was a cursed land that rejected human footsteps. A red warning pointing to the southern boundary where Central Plains civilization ended, the southern barbarian poison forest. The mistress of Gwajore Inn turned pale and clicked her tongue the moment she saw the map. You're insane. This is a place called the Swamp of the Dead. I've never heard of any master from the Central Plains who penetrated that poison forest and returned alive. Such a cursed place is what Changryongmen risked their lives to protect 10 years ago. Unhyun rolled up the map with dried bloodstains. It didn't matter whether the Changryong sword was there or not. Elder Beck's last words, his father's death, the truth of the annihilation. The starting point of everything was pointing to that bizarre whirlpool pattern. Hajin is alive. Choljeomden must have already spread throughout Nakyang. Their pursuit has not ended. Unhyun's voice was low and resolute. I must go. The mistress confirmed in Unhyun's eyes the unbreakable will that did not fear even death. The debt that must be repaid to K-Wuxia might have extended to this young descendant. Fine. If you're going to do this insane thing anyway, we should at least increase your chances of returning alive. She provided Unhyun with identification to disguise himself as a coachman for a silk merchant caravan heading south, and several precious antidote pills that could neutralize the southern poison. Unhyun's journey after leaving Nakyang's massive gates was a succession of harshness different from crossing the snowy mountains. The splendid and orderly landscape of the Central Plains transformed into rough and barbaric scenes as he headed south. The air grew heavy, the forests thickened, and people's eyes glinted with blatant wariness and greed. After leaving the caravan and walking alone for several more days relying on the map, Unhyun finally faced that barrier. Poison forest. It was not a forest. Thick green fog rising from the ground covered the sky like a massive wall. In the air mixed the smell of rotting grass, the fishy stench the swamp emitted, and the smell of unidentifiable beast carcasses rotting. With every breath, his head spun and his stomach churned. The trees were not straight like Central Plains pines, but twisted bizarrely like giant snakes coiled and tangled together, blocking the sky. Unhyun threw an antidote pill into his mouth. The bitter taste numbed his tongue, but his head seemed to clear a bit. Unhyun hesitated no longer and stepped foot by foot into the swampland where sticky mud clutched at his ankles. The swampland itself was one massive trap. Mud pits that would swallow you to the waist if you stepped wrong lurked everywhere, and from various spots in the swamp, toxic gas bubbled up with a gurgle, bursting bubbles. SSSS's, a sound. It was not the sound of rustling leaves. It was the sound of thousands, tens of thousands of wings simultaneously cutting through the air. When Unhyeon raised his head, a swarm of fist-sized poisonous insects with metallic luster was approaching like a cloud. Unhyeon immediately deployed the basic breathing technique Elder Beck had taught. He circulated internal energy throughout his body to protect his skin, but the creature's sharp stingers stung as if piercing his skin. Instead of drawing a sword, Unhyeon deployed dragon flow step footwork. The mud floor was much more slippery and unstable than solid ground, but the Azure Dragon footwork actually exploited that instability. As if gliding over water, he found spaces where the insect swarm's density was thin and slipped through gracefully. But the crisis did not end there. The poison fog grew thicker. His vision blurred, and strange hallucinations covered his sight. The image of Elder Beck falling while bleeding, Hajin's mocking laughter looking at him, and his mother's gentle voice calling, "Unhyeon ah." Unhyeon shook his head vigorously. Basic breathing technique. Breathe deeply, gather in the dantian, slowly exhale. Cold energy cooled his head, and the hallucinations lifted. Through ceaseless real combat and struggle for survival, Unhyeon's breathing technique deployment was becoming more refined without him even knowing. That was when it happened. Grr. The mud puddle right in front exploded massively. Rotten water and mud splattered in all directions, and from between them, a massive shadow surged up. A bizarre, swamp beast, with a body thicker than a human torso and an alligator's head. Its eyes were bloodshot, and a terrible stench wafted from its mouth. It lunged at Unhyeon, swinging sharp claws that could pierce even chain armor. Unhyeon hurriedly stepped back, but the beast spewed highly toxic fluid in a fan shape from its mouth. Unhyeon dodged by rotating his body, and the ancient tree where he had been standing melted with a hiss. Unhyeon leapt up using the surrounding twisted ancient trees as footholds. A sword does not cut with force. It is flow. Feel the dragon's flow. His forgotten father's voice flashed through his mind. Unhyeon saw not the beast's hard shell, but the flow of its movements. In midair, Unhyeon deployed Azure Dragon Fang, that had broken Gyeokchun's chain on the martial stage. This time it was not a hand blade. It was a fist that drew the basic breathing technique to its limits. Thwack. Unhyeon's fist struck not the beast's thick skull, but precisely at its relatively defenseless eye. Craw. The beast screamed terribly and plunged into the swamp. Unhyeon gasped for breath. He advanced for days and nights fighting the swampland. Poisonous insects, beasts, hallucinations. While crossing the threshold of death countless times, Unhyeon's body perfectly recalled the sensations of the Azure Dragon Sword technique. His clumsy footwork became refined as if flying over the swamp, and his basic breathing technique deepened further. Finally, the center of the swampland that the map indicated. There were the remains of a massive ancient castle. Half submerged in the swamp, a massive stone structure that had collapsed under the weight of years. That was precisely where the whirlpool on the map was drawn. The moment Unhyeon set foot at the castle entrance, a bone-chilling cold swept down his spine. The castle interior was submerged in pitch-black darkness. When Unhyeon lit a torch, a massive underground cavity beyond imagination revealed itself. And Unhyeon saw it. In the center of the cavity, dozens of jong below. A massive whirlpool was swirling. It was not water. Blood-red and sticky darkness. A mass of pure malice that squirmed as if alive. From within that darkness came bizarre whispers like thousands of vengeful spirits wailing. The blood-red whirlpool was bound by massive chains that seemed to descend from the sky. A seal. And right before that seal, on a stone seat that looked like a throne, sat a man. He could not be distinguished as living or dead. His skin was like dried old tree bark, and his hair had grown to the floor, tangled with dust. The most bizarre thing was that the chains binding him extended toward the seal, his body assimilated as if part of the seal itself. He was not guarding the seal, but had become a shackle of the seal itself. The moment Unhyeon took one step closer, the mummy-like man's eyes snapped open. Those eyes, like those of the Changryingmen elders who perished 10 years ago, were deep and tinged with blue. 10 years. A voice like stone and metal scraping, cracked, echoed through the cave. Finally, have you come? Or have you come to steal? The man slowly raised his head. He was not looking at Unhyeon, but feeling the faint, azure dragon energy, leaking from Unhyeon's body. Who are you, sir? I am the guardian who watches this tomb. The man, called Elder Chongmok, the last survivor of Changryingmen, tried to rise from his body bound in chains. The chains made a clank sound as they gripped his withered arms. From you, I feel the sect leader's blood. But that energy is too weak. If you are truly a descendant of Changryong, prove that you have the qualifications to pass me and protect this seal. Elder Chongmok raised his chain-bound arm and extended his palm toward Unhyeon. Azure Dragon Wave. The blue internal energy palm force that Elder Beck had used to block Hajin covered Unhyeon like a massive wave. But it was incomparably greater power than Elder Beck's, condensed over 10 years. Unhyeon did not dodge. The technique that had deflected Hajin's sword on the martial stage. The sensation his body remembered. Azure Dragon Coil. Unhyeon drew a circle with both arms and received Elder Chongmok's palm force. The force could not shatter Unhyeon's body but, like a great dragon coiling around a pillar, rode along Unhyeon's body and struck the cave wall. Boom! The massive cave rang and rocks fell. Elder Chongmok's blue eyes widened with shock. That technique is truly the sect leaders. I am Unhyeon of Changryingmen. I came to avenge my father, to find the Changryong sword. The blue light in Elder Chongmok's eyes faded, and deep sorrow and regret filled them. He leaned his chain-bound body back on the throne. Revenge. The Changryong sword. Foolish child. Elder Chongmok pointed to the sealed blood-red whirlpool. That is the demon. 1,000 years ago, the manifestation of pure malice that turned this land into hell. Our Changryingmen was not a sect established to dominate the martial world. A 10-year-old grudge filled Elder Chongmok's voice. We were guardians who existed to seal that demon. The night of annihilation. The reason they struck us was because of that. Unhyeon's breath seemed to stop. Those Central Plains Orthodox sect bastards, 10 years ago, sensed that this seal had weakened. They came north under the hypocritical pretext of helping the seal, betrayed us, and tried to steal this demon's power. Elder Chongmok cried out as if coughing blood. I barely escaped here and have endured 10 years by binding my life force to this seal. But even I have reached my limit now. The seal is weakening. Only then did Unhyeon realize the true meaning of the Changryong sword that Elder Beck had told him to find. Then, the Changryong sword is? The Changryong sword is not a weapon. Elder Chongmok shouted. It is the only key that can control this demon and reconnect these broken chains. Your father, to not surrender that sword to them, disappeared with the sword, the moment all truth was revealed. Kahaha, what a splendid story, quite grand for an old man's last words. From the cave entrance, from the darkness through which Unhyeon had entered, a voice like a messenger of hell rang out. Hajin, who had been lost in Nikayang. He was entering the cave leading dozens of Choljeomdan elite forces. Their armor was stained with swampland mud and beast blood, but their eyes glinted with tenacious madness like Hajin's. Right after you disappeared in Nikayang, I learned you were heading south. Where the little rat heads, there must be a rat hole. To think such tremendous power was hidden here. Hajin's eyes were fixed not on Unhyeon, but on the demon's sealed blood-red whirlpool. Old man, and remnant of Changryong, the key to open that power is the Changryong sword? Then, if there's no key, we just break the lock. Hajin raised his sword high. Destroy the seal. That power will be ours. The Choljeomdan members all shouted in unison and charged toward the seal. How dare these bastards! Elder Chongmok tried to rise from the throne, but his chain-bound body, already depleted of life force, staggered. He squeezed out his last remaining strength and, still bound in chains, emitted blue palm force to block the Choljeomdan members. Unhyeon ah, stop them. If that seal breaks, the world becomes hell. Unhyeon glared at Hajin, his father's nemesis, Elder Baek's nemesis, and now an evil spirit trying to plunge the world into crisis. Unhyeon no longer hesitated for revenge. What his father tried to protect 10 years ago. The reason Elder Baek tried to save him. And the weight Elder Chongmok had endured for 10 years. As the last descendant of Changryingman, Unhyeon threw his body toward the Choljeomdan members. At the center of the seal, the last two survivors of Changryingman and Choljeomdan's ambition clashed. Hajin sneered at that desperate fight and pulled out a black explosive mass from his breast. Powerful explosives manufactured in the Central Plains. Foolish bastards. If force doesn't work, we just break it. Hajin threw the explosive toward the thickest and oldest central chain supporting the seal. No. Unhyeon cried out and threw his body toward the explosive, but two Choljeomdan elite warriors blocked Unhyeon's path. The explosive struck the chain precisely. Boom. With an explosion that seemed to collapse the entire cave, one core chain of the seal that had endured 1,000 years snapped with a terrible rupturing sound. The demon's wailing changed, not a suppressed groan, but a cry of liberation. Boom. The moment the explosive Hajin threw severed the 1,000-year-old chain, the southern barbarian underground cavity transformed into hell. Krah. The blood-red whirlpool dozens of jong below. The demon's seal. The suppressed groans now became cries of liberation, shaking the entire cave. As one chain broke, the mass of suppressed malice surged up like a massive wave. The demon's blood-red energy began filling the cave, becoming pitch-black fog. It was not mere energy. It was a living entity. Arg. In my head. In my head. Among the Choljeomdan members who had come to destroy the seal, those with the lowest martial skills became the first sacrifices. They dropped their swords and screamed, tearing at their own heads. The demon's energy burrowed into their minds, awakening the most terrible fear and hatred. They could not recognize each other and began swinging swords at their comrades. When the cave's stalagmites and stalactites touched the demon's energy, they melted with a hiss. The air transformed into toxic poison that seemed to burn the lungs. Kahaha. Kahahaha. In this hellscape, only Hajin laughed alone. He spread both arms and greedily inhaled the surging blood-red energy. Power. This is the power to grasp the world. Hajin's body convulsed. His veins swelled black, and his eyes changed beyond red light into a blood-red abyss. The iron sword in his hand, as if responding to the demon's energy, began emitting a blood-red aura. Kill them all. Kill that old man and that brat, and destroy the remaining seal too. The command Hajin gave was no longer the movement of Choljeomdan's elite forces. It was the charge of a slaughter group that had lost reason, partially consumed by the demon's energy. Unhyeon ah. Just then, Elder Chongmok bound to the throne cried out desperately. But Unhyeon too was writhing in pain. The demon's energy burrowed into Unhyeon without exception. No, rather, it reacted even more violently to Unhyeon, through whom the Azure Dragon's blood flowed. Kill. Your father is dead. Elder Beck is dead too. Because you were weak. Take revenge. Tear them apart and kill them. The rage and sorrow suppressed for 10 years, the terror experienced on that night of annihilation amplified hundredfold, riding the demon's energy. Unhyeon's eyes became bloodshot. Incomparable to when he faced Gwakshoon on the martial stage, he was on the verge of uncontrollable rampage. Unhyeon screamed, feeling his hands instinctively moving to destroy not just Hajin, but everything before his eyes. Ah, get a hold of yourself, Unhyeon, ah. Elder Chongmok's voice became not simple speech but a lion's roar that struck Unhyeon's mind. That is not your power. It is the demon's whisper. Awaken, the dragon within you. It is Changryong's destiny not to be swallowed by the demon, but to suppress it. Elder Chongmok squeezed out his last remaining life force. There was only one thing he, bound in chains, could do. He transformed his blue internal energy into a single ray of light and shot it toward Unhyeon's forehead. Cold energy burrowed into Unhyeon's mind. The demon's red whispers and Elder Chongmok's blue cry clashed within Unhyeon's inner self. In the burning pain, Unhyeon saw the back of Elder Beck who had saved him and wandered through the snowfield. Survive. That was not a cry only for revenge. We were guardians. Elder Chongmok's cry echoed in his ears. Yes, I am, not a destroyer. Unhyeon did not try to forcibly push away the demon's energy. Instead, he returned to the fundamentals of the basic breathing technique Elder Beck had taught. He drew up the clear, blue azure dragon energy flowing from deep within himself. If the demon's energy was red and black flames, Unhyeon's energy was the water of the deep sea that would not freeze even in those flames. Instead of accepting the demon's energy, Unhyeon enveloped his entire body with his blue energy, giving the demon's energy no gap to seep through. When Unhyeon opened his eyes, the bloodshot pupils had changed to a deep blue light like Elder Chongmok's, mixed with no impurities. Unhyeon overcame the inner demon and reached the upper levels of the Azure Dragon Sword technique. Finally, you have returned, descendant of Changryong. Elder Chongmok smiled faintly. You bastard. How dare. Hajin was shocked by Unhyeon's transformation. He could not understand Unhyeon emitting stronger and purer energy than himself who had accepted the demon's energy. Hajin, consumed by jealousy and rage, swung his sword loaded with the demon's energy. Iron sword demonic chain. Blood-red sword chi cut through the cave and covered Unhyeon. Unhyeon, ah, stop that bastard. The seal. I will handle it. Elder Chongmok severed even the last life force that had been supporting the throne. His withered body emitted light and completely assimilated with the seal's chains that had bound him. He sacrificed his remaining life to deploy a blue barrier preventing the demon's energy from leaking outside the cave. Unhyeon turned his back on Elder Chongmok's sacrifice and faced Hajin. Hajin's sword was fast and destructive. With the demon's energy added, it seemed that even a graze would rot the flesh. But in Unhyeon's eyes, Hajin's sword was visible. Much slower and cruder than before. Unhyeon deployed Azure Dragon Coil. Without dodging Hajin's blood-red sword chi, he enveloped it with both hands and twisted its flow. The sword chi glanced past Unhyeon and struck the cave wall. Your sword is not yours, Unhyeon said coldly. Shut up. Hajin recovered his sword and thrust again. Unhyeon deployed Azure Dragon Fang. His hand blade struck precisely at the side of the iron sword wrapped in blood-red energy. Clang. Cracks began forming in Hajin's iron sword. When the demon's energy and Azure Dragon energy collided, the borrowed power could not defeat pure power and shattered. How? My power. Hajin felt terror at the fact that he was being pushed back. Unhyeon did not miss the opportunity. A new technique of the awakened Azure Dragon Sword technique. A palm technique that loads internal energy and destroys the opponent's energy. Azure Dragon Crushing Wave. Unhyeon's palm struck precisely at Hajin's defenseless chest. Blue internal energy burrowed into Hajin's body and exploded the blood-red demon energy that had settled inside him. Rgh. Hajin coughed up not blood, but black blood mixed with blood-red energy, and was slammed into the wall. The demon's energy flowed backward, burning his energy meridians. This can't be. Hajin staggered up in terror. He realized he could not defeat Unhyeon. Hajin pulled out his last remaining smoke bomb from his breast and struck it on the floor. Retreat. Everyone retreat. Black smoke filled the cave, and Hajin abandoned his subordinates who had lost reason and fled alone into the darkness. When the smoke cleared, inside the cave were only Unhyeon, the dying elder Chongmak, and the Choljeomdan members who had gone mad from the demon's energy. But there was no joy of victory. Though Hajin had fled, the seal had already weakened beyond recovery. The blue barrier elder Chongmak had deployed by sacrificing his life began cracking like shattering glass. Ku. Unhyeon ah. Unhyeon hurriedly ran to Elder Chongmak. Elder. My internal energy. Unhyeon tried to inject blue energy into the seal, but it was pouring water into a bottomless jar. It's useless. Already. Too late. The seal has been destroyed. Elder Chongmak, bleeding, grasped Unhyeon's hand. Only the Changryong sword can stop this. The Changryong sword. Where is the Changryong sword? Your father, to prevent it from falling into their hands, sent the sword to the safest place. Elder Chongmak's eyes lost their light. The center of the Central Plains. The heart of the world. The Imperial Palace. In the Imperial Palace's secret vault. The sword sleeps. You must find it. Elder Chongmak's hand fell powerlessly. Simultaneously, the last blue barrier suppressing the demon's energy completely shattered. The demon's blood-red energy finally began leaking beyond the underground cave, beyond the swampland, toward the Central Plains sky. Unhyeon left behind the deceased guardian and looked at the wavering seal. He had lost Hajin, and the seal was destroyed. Now Unhyeon had only one goal. To find the Changryong sword, and reverse this hell. The southern barbarian poison forest was collapsing. As the demon's energy burst forth, the underground cavity that Elder Chongmak had exchanged his life for began to cave in beneath the swampland. Unhyeon desperately escaped between pouring earth mounds and collapsing stone walls. From behind him came the sound of malice imprisoned for thousands of years finally wailing toward the world. Unhyeon's body was in tatters. But his mind was colder and clearer than ever. Imperial Palace. The Imperial Palace's secret vault. Elder Chongmak's last words. That was the only hope. Unhyeon ran toward the Central Plains day and night. The wounds from Hajin and the internal injuries from suppressing the demon's energy seemed to tear through his entire body, but he could not stop. Now that the seal was broken, every moment was urgent. When Unhyeon reached Nakyang's Wajore Inn, again, he was nearly no different from a corpse. The mistress was shocked by Unhyeon's appearance as he entered through the door and the ominous energy he emanated. Unhyeon coughed blood and uttered just one phrase. Imperial Palace. Secret Vault. The mistress's face turned ashen. You're insane. The moment you speak of the Imperial Palace, both our heads will roll. That place is the world's greatest forbidden zone. The seal has been broken. At Unhyeon's single statement, all the mistress's rebuttals ceased. She had already sensed the faintly felt blood-red energy from the southern sky that made the heart unpleasant. The mistress locked the inn's doors and lit all the lamps in the underground secret room. She began mobilizing her entire intelligence network, worth her very life, that even Wuxia could not have deployed. From Nakyang's beggar gangs to pleasure house courtesans to low-ranking palace eunuchs. Hundreds of eyes and ears tracked the words, Imperial Palace Secret Vault, and Changryong Sword. Information gathered throughout the entire night. But the more information gathered, the more the mistress's face hardened with despair. Strange. Too quiet. The mistress cut the candle wick with trembling hands. All information about the Imperial Palace's secret vault is converging to one place. Someone is intentionally controlling information and collecting it. Unhyun asked without time to tend his wounds. Who? The alliance leader of the Central Plains Orthodox sect. Called the world's greatest righteous sword. The North Star of the martial world, Akchianmyeong. Unhyun had never heard that name. But in the mistress's voice was deep fear incomparable to when she spoke of Hajin. Alliance leader Akchianmyeong. He is known as the emperor's teacher and the noblest figure maintaining order in the Central Plains martial world. But what my intelligence network indicates is that he has tenaciously tracked the whereabouts of the Changryong sword since 10 years ago. In that moment, all pieces fit together in Unhyun's mind. The mastermind behind the annihilation 10 years ago. The hypocritical alliance leaders of the Orthodox sect that Elder Beck and Wuxia had mentioned. And Hajin. Choljeomden. The mistress nodded. Yes. Choljeomden is alliance leader Akchianmyeong's direct action squad. Now I understand his true purpose. The mistress spat out a shocking truth. Akchianmyeong moved on two fronts. He knew the Changryong sword was in the Imperial Palace's secret vault. But he lacked the key, or qualification, to retrieve it. So he sent Hajin to the southern barbarians to destroy the seal itself. While attempting to destroy the seal to absorb the demon's power, he also prepared for any contingency by trying to obtain the key, the Changryong sword. Whether the southern seal broke or not, Akchianmyeong tried to obtain the demon's power and monopolize even the Changryong sword, the only means of resistance. Under the pretext of protecting the world, he tried to devour it. Even at this moment, Akchianmyeong is preparing to retrieve the Changryong sword from the Imperial Palace's secret vault. Unhyun rose from his seat. His internal injuries twisted, but he gritted his teeth and endured. Please, show me the way. It's suicide. Even so, I must go. The mistress looked into Unhyun's eyes for a long time. And finally, from the deepest part of the wall, she pulled out an old map inherited from her predecessors. Beneath the Imperial Palace, there is a secret waterway built by the previous dynasty. A path neither the current emperor nor Akchianmyeong knows. My ancestor owed a life debt to the one who built that waterway. This map is the only trace. The mistress assigned to Unhyun the nimblest of her subordinates, a masked figure called Bayong. Bayong will guide you to the entrance of the secret vault. After that, I'll leave it to your fate. That night, a new moon without even moonlight. Unhyun and Bayong infiltrated the deepest underground of the Imperial Palace through Nakyang's filthy sewers. The waterway, untouched by anyone for decades, was a lair of rotten water and rats, but the two advanced silently through the darkness. Finally, the entrance to the secret vault marked on the map. It was a thick stone gate disguised as a massive dragon statue. This is as far as I go. Bayong whispered. Beyond this door is a place not even in our intelligence. It was the moment Unhyun placed his hand on the stone gate. Who goes there? From the darkness, 3 warriors wearing pitch-black masks simultaneously sprang out. Their swords did not reflect light, and their presence was undetected even by Bayong. The Emperor's direct assassination squad. The finest elite privatized by Akchianmyong, the Jiamyongwi. Intruder. Eliminate. 3 swords from different angles aimed at Unhyeon's heart and neck. Unhyeon tried to deflect the swords by deploying Azure Dragon Coil. But the Jiamyongwi's swordsmanship was on a different level from Cholgeomdn's. Their swords were trained not for destruction, but solely for efficient killing. Clang. Unhyeon deflected 2 swords, but the last one grazed Unhyeon's shoulder. Blood-red blood spurted out. This bastard is no ordinary one. Use full power. All 3 Jiamyongwi charged again simultaneously. Unhyeon's injured body could not handle 3 finest assassins. That was when it happened. Go ahead, sir. Byong pushed Unhyeon away and blocked the Jiamyongwi's path. Byong. The mistress's debt is a debt to Changryingman. Go and find that sword. Byong pulled out a small explosive mass from within. It was a powerful object incomparable to what Hajin had used in Nakyang's underground cave. Damn. The Jiamyongwi recoiled in shock, but it was too late. Byong looked at Unhyeon and smiled faintly from behind the mask. Boom. The underground waterway collapsed. The powerful explosion swept away both the Jiamyongwi and Byong, completely blocking the path between Unhyeon and them. Unhyeon clenched his fists until they bled before the collapsing stone tomb. Once again, someone had sacrificed themselves for him. Rage and sorrow hastened Unhyeon's awakening. Unhyeon turned toward the stone gate. And he struck the stone gate with his palm loaded with Azure Dragon energy, Azure Dragon crushing wave. The stone gate weighing thousands of jun opened inward with a roar. The interior of the secret vault was different from Unhyeon's imagination. It was not a warehouse full of gold or treasures. It was a massive circular space, and through a hole in the ceiling, a single ray of cold moonlight illuminated the center of the room. And beneath that moonlight, a single sword was suspended quietly as if floating in midair rather than stuck in a sword stand. Changryong's sword. It was not a sword decorated with splendid jewels. Rather, it looked too simple and worn. It had no scabbard, and the blade shone with a mysterious light that could not be distinguished as blue or black. Unhyeon approached the sword as if entranced. As Unhyeon approached within 3 chiak of the sword, the dragon-patterned necklace he had carried for 10 years in his breast began growing hot as if burned. Wang. When the necklace resonated, the Changryong sword also made a low cry as if awakening from millennia of sleep. A blue aura spread like waves from the blade. Unhyeon extended his hand. The moment Unhyeon's fingers touched the cold sword hilt, massive light exploded in Unhyeon's mind. All memories lost for 10 years. The night of the burning annihilation, his father's last appearance raising the sword to save him. The gentle voice teaching him the first technique of swordsmanship. Unhyeon ah, the sword is not death. The sword is life. It is raised to protect. Along with his father's memories, all the secrets of the Azure Dragon sword technique revived in his mind as if they had been his from the beginning. Not the basic breathing technique, but the complete Azure Dragon divine art flowed through Unhyeon's energy meridians like a rampage. From Unhyeon's entire body, powerful blue energy rose like a pillar, intense enough to evaporate the blood flowing from his wounds. When the blue light faded, Unhyeon had been reborn. Not a pursued boy, but the last sect leader of Changryingman who had remembered everything. Unhyeon naturally drew the Changryong sword. The sword fit perfectly in his hand as if it had been one with Unhyeon's arm from the beginning. Right at that moment, excellent, truly excellent. From the deepest darkness of the secret vault, a calm voice rang out along with applause. A man slowly walked out. He wore neither Jiamyongwi's attire nor Cholgeomdn's uniform. He wore a dark silk robe reminiscent of a noble scholar. But the overwhelming presence emanating from his body was of a depth like the deep sea, incomparable even to Hajin or Elder Chongmok. To think that sword's ritual of choosing its master would be such a spectacle. Worth the wait. The man revealed his face under the moonlight. A gentle-looking middle-aged face. But only those eyes were black and cold like the demons. Akjianmyang's closest aide and the true master of Choljeomdan. It was Muxija, the alliance leader, expressed his gratitude to you. Muxija pulled out a strange weapon resembling a brush from his waist. That sword is the seal's key. But the key was designed not to be drawn by those without qualification. For 10 years we could not even touch that sword, though it was before our eyes. Muxia's eyes glinted with greed toward the Changryong sword. You, the last bloodline of Changryong, unlocked that lock for us. Thank you, Anhyan. Now, hand over that sword. The moment he grasped the Changryong sword, Anhyan was no longer Anhyan. It was not simply the recovery of memories. Everything lost for 10 years. His father's gentle gaze, his mother's warm touch, the first sensation of the sword, and even up to the final secret of the Azure Dragon Sword. Technique, everything was engraved upon his soul again. The blue internal energy that had boiled with rage, sorrow, and vengeance was completed into the majestic and tranquil Azure Dragon divine art, like that of the cold, deep sea. The blood flowing from his wounds stopped, and his torn energy meridians were reconstructed by the sword's energy. Anhyan opened his eyes. They were not the eyes of a pursued boy. They were the eyes of the last sect, leader of Changryingmen, who shouldered everything. Excellent. Truly excellent. From the darkness of the secret vault, Muxija walked out holding his brush. He looked at Anhyan's transformation with admiring eyes. To think that sword's ritual of choosing its master would be such a spectacle. Worth the wait. You, the last bloodline of Changryong, unlocked that lock for us. Muxia's gentle expression disappeared and was filled with terrible greed. Alliance leader Akjianmyang desires absolute order to correct this turbulent martial world. That demon in the southern barbarians is the most powerful force to establish that order. Yet you Changryingmen dared to monopolize that power for 1,000 years. Muxija aimed the brush tip at Anhyan. From the brush tip, sticky ink rose like a snake. Now that key is unnecessary. We will soon become the force itself. Thank you, Anhyan. You fulfilled your duty as the last bloodline. Now hand over that sword and die. Muxia's brush sliced through the air. Ink kill 1,000 snares. Dozens of black ink tentacles, like living snakes, pounced from all directions to bind Anhyan. Anhyan raised the Changryong sword. The first sword form his father had taught him in his memories. Azure Dragon Form 1 Dragon Dance. Anhyan's body moved as if dancing, yet faster and more graceful than any martial artist's footwork. As the sword cut through the air, it was not simple sword chi. Following the sword's trajectory, the deep blue dragon energy, Changryong sword aura, bloomed. Swish. The blue sword aura did not cut away Muxia's ink tentacles. The moment the sword aura touched them, the ink vanished into the air without trace, as if purified. Exclamation mark. Muxia's eyes filled with shock for the first time. Anhyan did not stop. Azure Dragon Form 3 Dragon Fang. It was the completed form of the Azure Dragon. Fang, he had instinctively used in Nikayang. The sword extended like lightning. Blue sword aura gathered like a dragon's molars and aimed at Muxia's heart. How dare! Muxija panicked and blocked Dragon Fang with his brush. The moment brush and sword collided. Crack. The brush shaft in Muxia's hand, made from 1,000-year-old dark iron, could not withstand the Changryong sword's aura and snapped in two. This can't be. How long have you even held that sword? 10 years. Unhyun answered coldly. For 10 years. I've held this sword in my dreams every night. Unhyun swung the sword again. The Azure Dragon Sword technique was not a destructive sword art. He deflected all of Muxia's attacks with Azure Dragon Coil, and pierced through all defenses with Azure Dragon Fang. Muxija, without even time to deploy his specialty bizarre ink arts, was helplessly pushed back. Trapped in the pouring blue sword dance. You bastard, you bastard. Muxija realized he was being completely overwhelmed. He was driven to the vault's wall. This is what you brought upon yourself. Taste the Alliance leader's power. Muxija tore his chest with his nails and pulled out from his breast a small pill beaded with blood-red blood and swallowed it. It was Akchianmyong's secret technique, condensed demon energy, that had flowed from the southern barbarians. Kra. Muxia's body began turning blood red like Hajin's. But incomparable to Hajin, condensed malice exploded. From the broken brush shaft. Blood-red energy flowed like ink and shaped the brush again. Ink Demon Heaven. The demon's blood-red energy clashed with the Azure Dragon's blue sword aura. Boom. The entire Imperial Palace secret vault trembled, as if it would collapse from the collision of two massive forces. Right at that moment, the southern barbarian swampland thousands of li away. The resonance of the two forces completely shattered the balance of the final seal that Elder Chongmok had been holding with his life. RRRR rumble. The underground cavity completely caved in, and the center of the swampland split massively, and the demon's main body that had been imprisoned for thousands of years. A pillar of blood-red malice surged toward the sky. Nakyang's night sky was instantly dyed blood-red. Unhyun, fighting in the Imperial Palace vault, stopped his sword. The Changryong sword, as the key, sensed the seal's destruction and cried out in sorrow. Unhyun felt it, the sound of millions of souls wailing in terror. Muxija laughed madly even while bleeding. Kahaha, do you hear it? That is the overture of a new era. The Alliance leader will grasp the world. Even if you kill me here, it's already too late. Unhyun was placed between two choices. Kill this one and run toward the seal? The faces of those who had died for him flashed through Unhyun's mind. Elder Beck, K-Wuxia, the mistress of Gwajore, and the unnamed masked figure, Bayong. They did not wish for Unhyun to take revenge. It is raised to protect. His father's voice resonated in Unhyun's heart. I'm sorry, Unhyun murmured low toward Muxija. I can no longer waste time on you. Unhyun gripped the Changryong sword anew. All his memories, all his rage, all his sorrow, and all his duty. He contained in this single strike. The final secret of the Azure Dragon Sword technique. Azure Dragon Sword Scar. It was not blue light. As Unhyun's sword cut through the air, following that trajectory, a pitch-black sword's trace remained as if space itself was being torn. That trace sucked in Muxia's blood-red demonic energy and began erasing Muxia's very existence. This power, even the Alliance leader, Muxija was shocked, seeing his own body collapsing. The sword chi of Azure Dragon Sword Scar pierced through Muxia's heart. Victory was decided. However, Muxia's blood-red eyes as he died burst with final madness. Together. To hell. Let's go. Muxija, still gripping the Changryong sword that had pierced his heart, detonated his own heart condensed with demon energy. Demon heart self-destruction. A blood-red sun exploded within the Imperial Palace's secret vault, swallowing Unhyun, who held the Changryong sword, head-on. Muxia's demon heart self-destruction swallowed the Imperial Palace's secret vault. The storm of blood-red demonic energy collapsed everything. But from the center of that explosion, from within those hellish flames that should have devoured everything, not pitch-black darkness, but pure, deep blue light burst forth in reverse. Anhyun's eyes were closed. The Changryong sword in his hand wailed to protect its master. The Ki rejected the rampage of force. The Azure Dragon Divine Art's blue sword aura enveloped Anhyun like a massive cocoon, and the demonic energy that had been Muxia's final struggle was purified and vanished the moment it touched that blue light. Boom! The vault's ceiling collapsed. Anhyun burst through the pouring pile of rocks and surged up to the center of the destroyed imperial palace. The scene Anhyun faced was a hellscape more terrible than Muxia's self-destruction. Nakyang's night sky was torn. As the seal in the southern barbarians thousands of li away was completely destroyed, the demon's main body, a whirlpool of blood-red malice, was open in Nakyang's sky like a massive dimensional gate. Blood-red rain fell, and the imperial palace soldiers and people who were struck by that rain lost their reason and began tearing at each other. And in the center of that hell, atop the ruins of the imperial palace throne, one man stood with both arms spread, receiving the blood-red demonic power pouring from the sky in ecstasy. The alliance leader of the Central Plains Orthodox sect. The Emperor's teacher. The world's greatest righteous sword. Akjianmyeong, you've come. Akjianmyeong slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were no longer human. They were a blood-red abyss like the demons. To think Muxija would present the key so quickly. Thanks to that, complete power has descended for the first time in 1,000 years. Anhyun, what your bloodline guarded for 1,000 years. I will now claim it. The overwhelming presence emanating from Akjianmyeong's body was incomparable even to Muxija or Hajin. He had already assimilated with the demon's power and become a calamity itself. Anhyun gripped the Changryong sword anew. His father's nemesis. The true mastermind of the annihilation 10 years ago. Elder Baek, K-Wuxia, Bayong, and Elder Changmak. The end of all those who had died for him was directed at this very one. This was the final clash. For the world's order, your sacrifice is necessary. As Akjianmyeong extended his hand, the blood-red whirlpool in the sky responded, becoming a massive spear of demonic energy and covering Anhyun. Instead of answering, Anhyun swung his sword. Azure Dragon form one dragon dance. A dragon of blue sword aura surged up and collided with the spear of demonic energy. Roar. All of Nakyang wailed at the fight of two giants. Akjianmyeong did not draw a sword. He himself was the sword. Each gesture became the demon's authority, pressing Anhyun with the power to collapse mountains and split earth. Anhyun poured out everything of the Azure Dragon sword technique. Azure Dragon Fang tried to pierce through Akjianmyeong's demonic energy defense, but Akjianmyeong deflected the sword with greater force. He tried to deflect attacks with Azure Dragon Coil, but the demon's power ignored trajectories and shocked even Anhyun's organs. A desperate fight. Anhyun was pushed back. He coughed blood. Akjianmyeong was being supplied with near-infinite demonic energy from the whirlpool in the sky. Meanwhile, Anhyun's Azure Dragon Divine Art was reaching its limits as a single human. It's over. Akjianmyeong's blood-red palm force struck as if to break the Changryong sword. Anhyun blocked with his sword but knelt under that overwhelming power. Right at that moment, into Anhyun's mind, into his consciousness that seemed about to collapse, countless voices burrowed. Survive, Anhyun Ah. You must survive. And find the Changryong sword. Elder Baek's desperate cry. Don't die. The moment you die, I can never repay my debt either. K-Wuxia's prickly voice. Go. And find that sword. Bayong's last cry. The sword is not death. The sword is life. It is raised to protect. His father's last teaching. They did not wish only for Unhyeon to take revenge. They wished him to protect. Unhyeon's eyes regained their blue light once more in despair. Yes, this sword is not a sword for revenge. Unhyeon, still kneeling, gathered everything he had left toward Akcheonmyeong's demonic energy crushing him. You desired power, but you do not know the weight of that power. The 1,000-year destiny. Unhyeon raised his sword. All his memories, all his rage, all his sorrow, and the wishes of all those who sacrificed for him. As the last sect leader of Changryingmen, no, as a guardian, protecting the world. The final secret of the Azure Dragon Sword technique. Azure Dragon Sword Scar. Unhyeon's sword cut through the air. It was the true secret, on a different dimension from when he cut Muxija. It was not blue light, nor blood-red light. Following the trajectory where Unhyeon's sword passed, a pure, void, trace, a sword scar, remained as if space itself was being torn. That sword scar sucked in Akcheonmyeong's demonic energy. The chain of power, connecting the blood-red whirlpool in the sky with Akcheonmyeong, was cut away as if locking it with a key. Akcheonmyeong's eyes filled with fear for the first time. The supply of demonic energy from the sky was severed. This power. No, my order. Azure Dragon Sword Scar pierced through Akcheonmyeong's heart. The blood-red demonic energy that had enveloped Akcheonmyeong's body scattered like an illusion. He returned not as a demon, but merely as an old martial artist filled with ambition. The world's. Akcheonmyeong's body, cut by the sword scar, scattered into dust. The revenge that had continued for 10 years finally ended. But hell did not end. Though Akcheonmyeong had vanished, the demon's gate, opened in the sky, was still spewing blood-red poison. Unhyeon rose, bleeding. He looked at the torn wound in the sky. And looked at the Changryong sword he held. Unhyeon now realized the last thing he had to do. Unhyeon gathered his last remaining Azure Dragon divine art at the sword's tip. He aimed the sword toward the whirlpool in the sky. And he deployed Azure Dragon Sword Scar, not toward Muxija, not toward Akcheonmyeong, but toward the sky itself. It was not a sword of destruction. It was a sword of sealing. As Unhyeon's sword crossed the torn sky as if stitching it, the pitch-black sword scar became a massive seal itself, filling that torn space. The blood-red whirlpool stopped. The rain of blood falling from the sky ceased. The sword scar remained like a massive scar carved in the sky, but the demon's gate finally closed. The darkness lifted, and over the ruined Nikaang, dawn broke. The incident was resolved. The truth that the Orthodox sect alliance leader Akcheonmyeong had been the culprit, who summoned the demon, spread throughout the entire martial world through the mouths of survivors. Choljeomdon was disbanded, and the Central Plains Orthodox sect crumbled under criticism of their hypocrisy. The martial world's order began to reorganize. People sought the hero who saved the world, the last descendant of Changryingmen. They tried to offer him the position of alliance leader, or the position of imperial palace guardian. But Unhyeon was not there. He did not rebuild Changryingmen. Though revenge was over, he did not choose power or honor. He simply, quietly disappeared into the ruins of Nikaang as dawn broke, carrying only the Changryong sword. Whether he chose the path of a wandering hero, or chose seclusion forgetting everything, no one knows. Several years after that, one spring day, the northern snowfield where everything had begun 10 years ago. At the site where the ruins of Solhawachan had been, one small nameless grave stood. It was Elder Beck's grave. Before the grave, the now old and scabbardless Changryong sword was thrust deep, guarding that place in its master's stead. And far away, atop a ridge where the snow was beginning to melt, A man stood alone, looking at the new sky from which the sword scar had disappeared. He was no longer the simple woodcutter, Hyeon, nor the rage-filled avenger, Anhyeon. In his eyes, though the deep sorrow left by 10 years of bloodshed was contained, beyond that sorrow resided the tranquility and strength of one who had overcome all the world's storms. The man turned his back on the snowfield that had been his only home, and once again walked slowly toward a nameless path.